Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a moment and just recognize the fact that I just crossed the 1900 subscriber mark. And so I would like to thank everyone for subscribing. I've noticed an uptick in the last couple of days, and so I feel like I probably owe a debt of thanks to somebody. I just haven't figured out who yet. I haven't seen any shout outs. If anyone's aware, please pass that information along to me so that I can thank whoever it is appropriately. And it looks like I'm on my way to the 2,000 subscriber mark, and I haven't figured out what I'm going to do for that threshold when I get there. I'll think about it. What I wanted to talk about today is something I've mentioned in the past few videos, and something that Anti-Citizen X alluded to in a video that he just uploaded, talking about 5 different, major problems or flaws with a Christian worldview or apologetic. And he was sort of basically saying, unless you can sort of get rid of those 5 big problems, unless you can find a way to deal with them, there's no reason to have any kind of discourse with someone. And the most important point that he was making was that of fallibility. In other words, if the person you're speaking to is not even willing to admit that there's the slightest possibility that they might be wrong, there's no real point in having any kind of discourse with that person, because it's not going to be discourse. And this is something I've alluded to in the past as well. I've called it the honesty of if. If my belief set is accurate, then these things follow. If my belief set is not accurate, even if I'm 99 and 44 100% sure that it is, if that ghost of a chance is there that I'm wrong, then some of that stuff at least would fall apart. And I think I would have a willingness to speak to anyone who's going to at least admit the honesty of if. If my belief set is accurate, if my belief set is not accurate. And I don't really care what the degree of certainty is that they have, as long as they're willing to admit that there's the slightest ghost of a chance that they could be wrong. Then we can discuss, because then they can at least entertain some thought experiments. They can entertain some hypotheticals of what would happen if, because I'm certainly willing to entertain those hypotheticals. I certainly, hopefully, have the honesty of if. I'm willing to entertain that I could be wrong. Now, we can sometimes move from there, from the honesty of if, to the integrity of I don't know. And this is a completely valid answer. And it is in no way means that you're subjugating yourself to the opposition's answers just because somebody comes up with an answer. It doesn't mean it's automatically valid if their opponent says, well, I don't really know. Again, I'll refer back to the Pele example. There's many examples you could think of where mankind once thought something was the answer for some unexplained natural phenomenon at the time, and they would put that forth. The honest answer in those cases might be, well, I don't know. I don't really buy what you're selling, but I don't know. I don't have an answer for it. They don't just sort of automatically have to accept the concept du jour just because they don't know, and it doesn't mean that they're wrong. In fact, in that essence, I think I don't know would be a more correct answer than Pele did it or whatever. And so I think, we have to keep in mind that there is a lot of integrity in I don't know, because when it comes to presuppositional apologetics and other very forward, very aggressive apologists, I don't know is seen as a weakness. I don't know is seen as a subjugation to whatever they want to put forth as an answer. And of course, what they don't often think about is, if I'm saying I don't know, and I have to submit myself to your answer because you've got a framework which explains things, that I would have to subject myself to anybody who comes along with a framework that explains things. So puts myself in a very unfortunate position, as Anti-Citizen X referred to in some of his video. And finally, I think we could add to the mix falsifiability. So when we talk about the honesty of if, fallibility, and the integrity of I don't know, I think falsifiability fits in there quite nicely. They kind of go hand in hand in hand. And I think it's interesting that among Christian apologists, especially the more aggressive ones, we often see falsifiability portrayed as some sort of a weakness or a flaw. And, it's rather silly. Really what we're talking about is verifiability. Now, of course, verifiability is a positive thing. We can verify the accuracy of something. Falsifiability doesn't really mean that. What it means is it's testable. There's a way in which this claim X that's made is testable so that we can see if there's any way that it fails. We can't ultimately necessarily verify its accuracy on the positive side, but what we could do is we could dismiss the claim if through a process of falsifiability we find a test that can be conducted which would nullify the claim. And I think that's why, of course, apologists often don't want or see falsifiability as something they don't want to deal with, and it's a flaw, because there are claims made, of course, in Scripture that would be falsifiable. There are things that we could actually test. They could be submitted to a test. And, of course, if they pass the test, that doesn't validate the claim. But if they fail the test, that nullifies the claim. And, of course, that's what they don't want. And there's many things, of course, that we could test in Scripture. You know, the geocentric sort of nature of the way Scripture defines our solar system and universe is something that we could test. It's a falsifiable claim, and of course it fails the test, and so falsifiability is for some reason looked upon as invalid. And I think that's kind of interesting. So just a couple of points that I wanted to make. I think it's actually quite pointless to try to have discourse with someone who won't admit to fallibility, who won't take on the approach of the honesty of if, and won't respect the integrity of I don't know, and doesn't understand what falsifiability really means and what it means for their belief set. Oh, and one more thing. I recognize after doing a little bit of editing that I'm probably going to take some heat for the way that I defined falsifiability in the early part of this video. So I wanted to take just a quick moment and clarify that and talk a little bit about why it's so important to us. So again, falsifiability is not necessarily about validating a claim in a positive sense. It's about whether or not we can even take a claim seriously, at least for the larger questions in our lives. I mean, after all, anybody could come along and make a claim that's unfalsifiable, it's untestable, and just sort of suggest that we got to take their word for it, and maybe even move the goalposts around a little bit. And this isn't how we make decisions in our lives, at least not for the larger questions. And so it's nice to know whether or not a claim is even testable, whether we could subject it to some sort of test that it might fail. That sort of tells us whether or not to take it seriously, I think. You know, and it may be that we don't even have any means to test it at this time or the technology to test it now, but through reason we can actually determine whether or not it's testable and whether or not it's something that we could take seriously. I'll go out of my comfort zone and use the theory of evolution as an example for this. So the theory of evolution is testable. There are things that we could do to falsify the theory of evolution. An example would be a fossil found in the wrong strata layer, legitimately, not through some sort of tumult. And that would pretty much set the theory of evolution on its ear. Now, if we don't find that, if we always find the correct fossils in the right layers based on the theory of evolution, that doesn't necessarily validate the theory in its entirety. It adds evidence in support of the theory, but it doesn't validate it. But if we did find that fossil in the wrong layer legitimately, that would be a falsification of the theory of evolution. And so you can see why it's important for us. It's important to have claims that we can actually take seriously. I'll probably still take some heat, but what are you going to do? Thanks for watching.